So a lot of people talk about whether Japan is a victim of censorship from the West or not, and one of the topics that has come up lately is Dragon Quest III's remake, where people have complained about the noticeable differences with skin being covered up, trolls' lips being slimmed down, religious imagery being removed, etc. The fact is, whether you call it censorship or not, there are changes. Now, ironically enough, people, such as on Reddit, have disabled, so they've essentially censored discussion of censorship. But now, an interview has come out with some very prominent figures, as you can see, that they cannot ignore. Former Shonen Jump editor, former Dragon Ball editor, and the current, well, forever, creator of Dragon Quest.
あとすごい話題になってたそのコスチュームとか当時とそのままなのかどうなのかみたいなのがありましたよね、また。
まあね、いろいろ規制もあってね、露出してきちゃいけないとかね。
So this was the major point of criticism against the Dragon Quest censorship. Now, there's a lot of changes that were done, whether you call that censorship or not, such as the trolls' lips, but amongst the fans, a lot of them noticed this, especially amongst the Japanese fans, was this covering up of skin. Like, the characters, they're showing too much skin, and then in the remake, they had to cover it up. And people were saying that this was disrespectful towards the late Akira Toriyama for the character designs and whatnot. But the thing is, when you're talking about covering up the skin, they don't do this to the male characters. They only do this to the female characters because, frankly speaking, no one actually cares. It's only those with this modern sensitivities, and potentially the company wants to cater to those for the modern audience. But seeing Concord, that doesn't really exist. I think the real reason, okay, so if you're a woke leftist looking at this, I'm gonna go over the rest of this video. Chill. I'm just gonna talk about my opinion right now. I think the real reason is a complicated game of telephone, and these Japanese creators just happen to be at the end of it all. Now, who's starting this telephone? Who's starting the calls? We won't ever really know.
そこをちょっとあんまり深掘りする気はないんですけど、いいのにだってフィクションだけどその中に主人公というあなたが入って冒険するっていうことでいいじゃないと思うんですけど、違うんですかね。
なんですかね。よくわかんないですけどね、これについてはね。
ゲームだし、まあフィクションという自分の中のバーチャル体験でのノンフィクションだから楽しければいいのにっていうふうに思っちゃいますけどね。
This is a message that a lot of these woke liberals need to hear. So a lot of them will say this fiction affects reality thing, which yes, it can, but when talking about the specifics, like, Japanese media like manga, anime, games, etc., well, Japan, a country obviously having consumed more of such media, would have been affected greatly, and you would see negative behaviors reflected in their population. But instead, you see things like higher crime rates in the Western world. And when talking about negative behaviors, by the way, I'm not talking about you getting offended by like some dude's hate speech or whatever. I'm talking about like actual crimes happening to you. So yeah, I don't see any basis to, the fiction versus reality argument ever when it comes to this type of stuff.
あんまり露出するとね、年齢が上がっちゃうっていうね。全年齢じゃなくなってしまうっていうのがあったりとか。
ルールがやっぱなんか各国違ったりするんでね、広くろうと思うと一番厳しいところに合わせざるを得ないとか。
でも当時そんなこと思わなかったですけどね。
So they got to think about these things they never really thought about in the past. So such as, they show too much skin and the rating for the age goes up, which is a thing that a lot of these woke people will say. They're saying like, oh, it's not because the Japan is catering to the West. They're catering to these rating boards such as Zero and ESRB, which, yes, there is some truth to that because, potentially they might want to make a lower rating, such as in the West, it's E for everyone. So that way they can cater to all ages, including younger audiences, so they can make more money. But I don't think that's the case, because come on now, this is an old game they're making a remake of. All the older fans are obviously adults by now, so I don't see how age could play any role into any of this. Now, if they wanted to make this for kids and whatnot, they could actually just make a separate version. which there's already precedent for that. They said that they have to, when they're looking at all these countries, they gotta do the ones with the strictest regulations. But we've seen things like gacha games where they make a separate version for a different region, or they make a separate ages version, or even in the case of Spider-Man 2, they took out they literally censored the LGBTQ stuff, the pride flags for the Middle East, like I think for Muslim majority regions. Whereas in the West, they had the normal, the globalized version. But in this case, the final version we're seeing right now, this is the, the global version. They're not making any specific versions, which I think they could have if they really wanted to. And yes, it could have cost more money, but I don't think it would cost that much more money to change a bit of text and a couple pixels here and there.
コンプラっていう名のね、やっぱりね、ある種のね、なんだろうな、絶対心というべき、善の名を借りた悪みたいなのがある。
The biggest example of evil disguised as good, in my opinion, is woke culture, because that's exactly what it is. Woke is literally performative. It's just fake activism.
全員が不快感を覚えないなんてことはないわけ。
If you cater to everyone, you cater to no one. That's the problem with getting a wider audience, in my opinion.
英米の方から欧米の方から来てるその宗教的な概念から来るその正教徒の考え方ってアメリカにあるじゃない。彼らのコンプラの考え方って本当ね狭い。
Some people might look at this and be like, oh, the chuds, the capital G gamers, they got it wrong. It wasn't because the Japan was catering to the Western sensitivities. It was because Japan was catering to the religious people, and that's why they're censoring things. But nope, if you look at the game, they actually censored religious imagery out of it. So if you were, pro-religion and, you wanted to censor certain things, why would you censor your own stuff out? So I don't think that's the reason. I think the religion that they're talking about is wokeism, and especially in the schools these days, it's a big problem. It's a big debate that, it's even reached, politics and whatnot. I mean, let's be real. The universities in America are essentially just very left-leaning institutions.
でだから向こうでコミックスだけに全部その年齢で区切ってやらなきゃいけない。少年ジャンプの漫画だったら13アップ、13歳以上じゃないと出せない。私は全部リテイクでなきゃいけない。でそれを訴訟が起きるそのために保険も入らなきゃいけない。もうこんなねバカな国とねやるの本当めんどくさい。でそっから日本も悪影響を受けてやってるから。
Okay, so he kind of jumps from topic to topic. He's talking about, selling shonen manga and whatnot in the United States. But the point is, he says that doing business with such a country is very, frustrating. So he's obviously not talking about his own country, Japan. He's talking about the United States, okay? So, and then he's saying that it could negatively impact their own country as well. Because no matter what you want to call it, whether it's censorship or whatnot, all these things, they cause you to self-censor. When you're faced with, okay, you got to face with this regulation here and this regulation here, eventually you don't want to deal with that, so you're gonna change things up on yourself, on the root cause, so that way you don't even have to deal with this censorship because you've created a product that is safe from the start. So that's essentially what's going to happen with all types of media.
主人公もね男女選べるんだけど、男女選ぶって書いていけないのね、タイプ1タイプ2なのね。
ねえ。
これ男女って誰が一体文句言うんだろうと思うんだけど、
そう
ね、わからないね。
なんか
So they talk about the body types, which is essentially they remove gendered expression of male and female in replacement for body types. And they have no idea who is requesting this and who's complaining, but I'll tell you who. It's a small vocal minority, and the reason why it's getting this attention is because the people in charge of this, these far left movements, they want to promote certain ideologies, and in this case, it's clearly transgender ideology, okay? And they want to feel included. So yes, it's not a small change, but why change it in the first place if it wasn't a big deal? Because it is a big deal to them, because they want to feel included. And it doesn't hurt people like us, right? But look, I'm just going to be real here. I think even if it doesn't hurt us and if it hurts them, they have a right to exist. They have a right to exist as human beings and whatnot, but they do not have a right to be represented everywhere they go, right? They do not have a right, because the standard is we live in a heteronormative society, right? Male and female biologically, which by the way, they actually get offended when you say things like biological male, but that's weird because that's the truth, and getting offended by the truth is very strange. But the point is there are these things, and for example, like if they go to the bathroom, they might complain, because the separation of male versus female, it's the same deal basically. This is just a digital version. There's no reason why they should be complaining, because look, the fact is, the reason we have these separations is because society operates better with these efficiencies. When we see these patterns in nature, we reflect that in our infrastructure, such as having male and female bathrooms. There's things like men, they can pee while standing up. So we have things like urinals, right? And urinals, they might be more efficient than toilets that flush and use more water. So there are reasons, there are more efficiencies for having separations, right? And even like you're a janitor, you come in, you clean. When you go to the women's restroom, you know what to clean. There's different disposal units and different stuff like that. They're all toilets. There's no urinals, at least. When you go to the men's restroom, you know what what you're getting, right? There is clear separation of concerns between a male and a female in biology, and also reflected in society, such as our infrastructure. But these people, they want to disrupt all that, okay? And yes, there are gender neutral bathrooms, but those cost additional money. So encouraging people to spend more money to suit a very small minority is very bad, in my opinion. But there are bathrooms that, in places that are too cheap to have multiple bathrooms. They probably just have one for anyone can go use them. But the point being is that in places where there are separation of genders, in places like bathrooms, it's for a good reason, right? And they want to break that. Like, society operates more efficiently. They want to disrupt that. Anyways, I'm gonna get canceled. I recorded this like 10 times, so I didn't get canceled. So this is the best I can do. Peace out. Okay, so I'm not done talking just yet. So me saying that transgender people should not feel included by default, me saying something like that could be classified as hate speech or whatever. And right now, I'm American. Hate speech is actually allowed. I don't know if it's allowed on YouTube. But see, here's the thing. Hate speech, who defines what hate is? You know what I mean? And the problem right now is the far left-leaning people, the World Economic Forum and those people in charge, they actually want to take away the First Amendment rights, the freedom of speech, because First Amendment is what's preventing them from controlling your thought. Well, they're controlling your speech, but over time, if no one is saying it, the younger generation will grow up in a world where less people are saying things, and they will essentially, their thoughts will have been controlled. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Whoever says that hate speech should not be allowed is essentially trying to control your thought.